Continuing Chapter 9, The Fisher King, from Jessie L. Weston's From Ritual Romance. In connection with my previous remarks on the subject, page 119, I would point out that the quest and Grand St. Grail versions of the main king motif in the most unintelligent manner. The element of old age inherent in the Avalanche or Drains incident is complicated and practically obscured by an absurdly exaggerated wounding element, here devoid of its original significance. Thus, if we consider the king apart from his title, we find that, alike from his position in the story, his close connection with the fortunes of his land and people, and the varying forms of the disability of which he is the victim, he corresponds with remarkable exactitude to the central figure of a well-recognized nature ritual, and may therefore be justly claimed to belong ab origine to such a hypothetical source. But what about his title? Why should he be called the Fisher King? Here we strike what I hold to be the main crux of the problem, a feature upon which scholars have expended much thought and ingenuity, a feature which the authors of the romances themselves either did not always understand or were at pains to obscure by the introduction of the obviously post hoc motif above referred to, i.e., that he was called the Fisher King because of his devotion to the pastime of fishing. Apropos of which Heinzel sensibly remarks that the story of the Fisher King presupposes a legend of this personage only vaguely known and remembered by Chrétien. Practically, the interpretations already attempted fall into two main groups, which we may designate as the Christian legendary and the Celtic folklore interpretations. For those who hold that the Grail story is essentially and fundamentally Christian, finding its root in Eucharistic symbolism, the title is naturally connected with the use of the fish symbol in early Christianity, the ichthos anagram, as applied to Christ, and the title Fishers of Men bestowed upon the apostles. We might want to look at the fishmen of the Babylonian, or actually I think it goes back to Sumerian myths, but the papal ring of the fisherman, although, I think it originally was a bracelet, though it must be noted that no manipulation of the Christian symbolism avails satisfactorily to the account of the lamentable condition in which the bearer of the title has fallen. For instance, the extravagances to which a strictly Christian interpretation can lead, Dr. Sebastian Evans' theories set forth in his translation in his Perlisvaus, A High History of the Holy Grail, and his The Quest of the Holy Grail. The author places the origin of the cycle in the first quarter of the 13th century and treats it as an allegory of the position in England during the interdict pronounced against King John and the consequent withholding of the sacraments. His identification of the characters with historical originals is most ingenious, an extraordinary example of misapplied learning. The advocates of the folklore theory, on the other hand, practically evade this main difficulty by basing their interpretation upon the bronze story of the catching of the fish by bronze, equating this character with the bronze of Welsh tradition and pointing to the existence of Irish and Welsh legend of the salmon of wisdom, the tasting of whose flesh confers all knowledge. Hertz acutely remarks that the incident as related by Braun is not of much importance as to justify the stress laid upon the name, Rich Fisher, by latter writers. We may also note in this connection that the Grail romances never employ the form wise fisher, which, if the origin of the name were that proposed above, we might reasonably expect to find. It is obvious that a satisfactory solution of the problem must be sought elsewhere. In my opinion, the key to the puzzle is to be found in the rightful understanding of the fish-fisher symbolism. Students of the Grail literature have been too prone to treat the question on the Christian basis alone, oblivious of the fact that Christianity did no more than take over and adapt to its own use a symbolism already endowed with a deeply rooted prestige and importance, just as it did with the tonic. But its theology, its concept of a Messiah, an Emmanuel, a Christ, didn't really connect to the Jewish one. It connected, but it was not supported by. So far, the subject cannot be said to have received adequate treatment. Certain of its aspects have been more or less fully discussed in monographs and isolated articles, but we still await a comprehensive study on this most important question. R. Pischel's Weber die Ursprung des Christlichen Fisch symbols is especially devoted to the possible derivation from Indian sources. Scheftelowitz das Fisch-Symbolik in Judentum und Christentum Archive for Religious Square contains a great deal, volume 14, contains a great deal of valuable material. R. The Fisher, The Quest, R. Eisler, Orpheus the Fisher, The Quest, Volumes 1 and 2, John Jonas, Johannes, Volume 3, The Messianic Fishmeal of the Primitive Church, Volume 4, isolated studies forming part of a comprehensive work on the subject, the publication of which has unfortunately been prevented by war. Okay, well, maybe that's... I thought that was going to be a note that I'll try not to share so boring notes. So far as the present state of our knowledge goes, we can affirm with certainty that the fish is a life symbol of immemorial antiquity, and that the title of fisher has from the earliest ages been associated with so-called deities who were held to be specially connected with the origin and preservation of life. In Indian cosmogony, Manu finds a little fish in the water, in which he would wash his hands. It asks and receives his protection, asserting that, when grown to full size, it will save Manu from the universal deluge. This is Jasa, the greatest of all fish. The first avatar of Vishnu, the creator, is a fish. The Bhagavatam has 24 figures in it that I postulate could actually have been a human at some point, but I mean humans, rather than incarnations of God, but there's other evidences connected to some of that, but that's for other programs, right? At the great feast in honor of this entity, held on the 12th day of the first month of the Indian year, Vishnu is represented under the form of a golden fish and addressed in the following terms: As thou, O God, hast, in the form of a fish, saved the Vedas who were in the underworld, save me also. The fish avatar was afterwards transferred to Buddha. In Buddhist religion, the symbols of the fish and the fisher are freely employed. Thus, in Buddhist monasteries, we find drums and gongs in the shape of a fish, but the true meaning of the symbol, while still regarded as sacred, has been lost, and the explanations like the explanations of the Grail romances, are often fantastic afterthoughts. In the Mahayana scriptures, Buddha is referred to as the fisherman who draws fish from the ocean of samsara to the light of salvation. There are figures and pictures which represent Buddha in the act of fishing, an attitude which, unless interpreted in a symbolic sense, would be utterly at variance with the tenets of the Buddhist religion. This holds good for Chinese Buddhism. The so-called goddess, Guan Yin, is Avalokitesvara, the female entity of mercy and salvation, is depicted either on or holding a fish. In the Han Palace of Kunming Chae, there was a fish carved in jade, to which in time of drought sacrifices were offered, the prayers being always answered. Well, if there's some presence, there's always things to witness one's prayers. It's not necessarily the idol or something that grants them, though. Both in India and China, the fish is employed in funeral rites. In India, a crystal bowl with fish handles was found in a reputed tomb of Buddha. In China, the symbol is found on stone slabs enclosing the coffin, on bronze urns, vases, etc., even as the Babylonians had the fish or fisher entity, Oannes, who revealed to them the arts of writing, agriculture, etc., and was, as Eisler puts it, teacher and lord of all wisdom. So the Chinese Fuyi, who is pictured with the mystic tablets containing the mysteries of heaven and earth, is, with his consort and retinue, represented as having a fish's tail. Kekrops played the same role with regard to the Greeks with the serpent's tail. The writer of the article in the open court asserts that the fish was sacred to those entities who were supposed to lead men back from the shadows of death to life. If this be really the case, we can understand the connection of the symbol first with Orpheus, later with Christ. As Eisler remarks, Orpheus is connected with nearly all the mystery, and a great many of the ordinary chthonic cults in Greece and Italy. Christianity took its first tentative steps in the reluctant world of Greco-Roman religion under the benevolent patronage of Orpheus. And the snake word, often logos, kind of, well, that's not quite it, but you know what I mean. A lot of things got merged into. I was thinking of Ophiuchus or something like that. There is little reason to doubt that if we regard the fish as a divine life symbol of immemorial antiquity, we shall not go very far astray. We may note here that there was a fish known to the Semites by the name of Adonis, although, as the title signifies Lord, and is general rather than specific, too much stress cannot be laid upon it. Of course, there's been mistranslations in the King James Version of the Bible and stuff to say the word Lord more, when that's in no way, so there's a lot of stress put on the term Lord to make people think of Jesus rather than God in those passages. It is more interesting to know that in Babylonian cosmology, Adapa the Wise, the son of Ea, is represented as a fisher. In the ancient Sumerian laments for Tammuz, previously referred to, that entity is frequently addressed as Divine Lamgar, Lord of the Net, the nearest equivalent I have so far found to our Fisher King. Whether the phrase is here used in an actual or symbolic sense, the connection of idea is sufficiently striking. In the opinion of most recent writers on the subject of the Christian fish symbolism, derives directly from the Jewish, the Jews, on their side, having borrowed freely from the Syrian belief and practice. Eisler, the Messianic Fish Meal of the Primitive Church, The Quest, Volume 4, where the various frescoes are described. Also, the article by Schweflitz, also referred to, while mainly devoted to Jewish beliefs and practices, this study contains much material derived from other sources, so far as it is the fullest and most thoroughly documented treatment of the subject I've met with. And we definitely see a lot of how the Bible is actually